Hello and a warm welcome to another episode of Leading in the New. I'm Gugulethu Cele. Now, companies are investing in the tools and technologies they need to keep pace with constant change in the digital era. But to achieve their goals, leaders are refocusing on an often overlooked factor, the workforce. On the show today, we'll be discussing the workforce of the future. And joining me now as to how we can unpack this topic and, more importantly, understand how to practically implement the moves to ensure that you prepare for a workforce enabled for the future, I have joining me our esteemed panelists today, Dr. Rose Phillips, Managing Director of Accenture Consulting, Professor Albert Vocker, who's from Gibbs Business School, Professor Shirley Zinn, Group Head of Human Resources at Woolworths, and Mpho Lehlape, Executive Chairperson of Litushane. Thank you so much for joining us today in conversation, and we certainly hope that we can break down many of these themes that have certainly come across. But I'd like us to begin by understanding the status quo of employment as well as the workforce of the current picture, not only from a South African context, but also from a Pan-African view. And Rose, perhaps this is the best place to start off with by getting your view on the current lay of the land and why it's imperative that corporates actually pay attention to the changing landscape.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, in the past, whether you were a mathematician or whether you were a marketer or even a machinist, you could spend your entire career doing one job, applying one set of skills to a business who has goals that were relatively unchanging. But today, that's not the case any longer. The pace at which technology is changing, the rapid introduction of automation requires now that businesses need to learn how to push new services, new products, and even new business models into the market to be competitive. And in order for you to be able to do that, you need to make sure that both your workforce and your organization is both agile, it's adaptable, and it's future fit. And that's the research, that's what the research has been showing.
Mm-hmm. On these elements, there are many nuances that we've picked up, but what I'd also like to gauge is the workforce. And we mentioned in the introduction that it has been underestimated and often overlooked. Is this a new and poignant time and era? Perhaps, Albert, if we come to you to get your view on the workforce and how critical it is now to the agility of a company, to the innovative nature of a company, as well as its sustainability in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. The workforce is changing and changing quite dramatically and will be continuing to change. We don't quite know what the workforce is going to look like 20 years from now, but we can see elements of it. And so we've got, as Accenture calls it, the liquid workforce, which is a beautiful way of describing it, where you don't have those traditional employee-employer relationships anymore. Many of your workers are having two jobs, and they're filling gaps. And the skills that are being sought are very, very different to what you'd traditionally imagine. Raises a whole bunch of interesting questions. We now in what they call the fourth industrialization, or Industry 4, which is beyond artificial intelligence. Now it's cognitive computing that's coming in, and you're finding middle managers being replaced by software. And we're in a transition at the moment, and we don't know where it's going to end up, but it's entertaining for an academic who's trying to understand all the new trends.
It's entertaining for you, but as a South African worker myself, when I hear the theme of digitization, I think that maybe my job will be taken over by a robot one day, where these questions will come up and they'll be able to pick up on the themes that we talk about on the channel here. And maybe this is the critical point where we actually need to understand, number one, are we actually ready for this change from a workforce point of view? And more importantly, are corporates also adapting to this culture and dynamic in order to remain competitive? Shirley, let's get your view here, and Paul, feel free to come in.
Absolutely. I think, we all understand that disruption is the name of the game. I think the ability to plan forward for that is where the challenges lie. I think that we understand that, technological advancement is not only an enabler any longer, it is a driver of new business models, new ways of work. It requires a whole new skill set. It requires a new way of thinking about the workforce, hierarchies in the way it used to exist with job descriptions and org charts, all neatly done, is not going to quite, be the name of the game any longer. So we need to think about what is called the extended workforce, and it's a network of, of people who are able to do be deployed to multiple projects, at different times for the unique skills. What does it mean for how we educate in universities and in schools? What does it mean for workplace skills? What does it mean for, how we define employment? What does it mean for labor relations and how we define an employee and provide benefits for those employees? And so I think there are a raft of challenges. We talk about the gig economy. People are now working multiple jobs, and the question is, is this a solution to some of our challenges that we face in terms of inequality, even in this country as we stand challenged right now in terms of our Gini coefficients? What are those challenges, and how are we going to rise, to them and start preparing our workforce to be ready and to be future fit?
Mm-hmm. People are adaptable, and people adapt to the most, unbelievable situations, and to survive is probably one of the best instincts that one has, because if you're challenged and you think that you're going to your being is going to be challenged, you adapt very quickly. But what we need to do from an HR perspective is we need to preempt this. We need to begin to have the conversations. We need to begin to change the practices. We need to begin to create situations which allow the people that are already in the workforce to start to learn the new skills that they're going to do. People have to be curious, and I can't be curious if I'm stuck in my job and I have to do what I need to do. What makes me curious is when something new comes up and I feel, wow, for me to be able to move on to the next step, or for me to be able to wake up tomorrow and come to work, I need to adapt to this. I need to do that. It is subconscious. It's the way that God has created us. But what HR needs to do is you need to begin to throw out there, include people in projects that new, that are going to challenge them differently, that are going to ask for new skills from them, new behaviors from them, new competencies from them. You need to create environments where, there's talk about digital immigrants and digital natives. You need to begin to, it's a new aspect of diversity management and diversity training development, whatever it is that we want to call it. With the issue of other people adapt better to technology, other people hold on to the Born Before Technology badge as if it's a badge of honor. We need to not challenge it directly, but create environments where people realize that without the technology or without adapting to the technology, people are going to change. One that is maybe stupid, but is a good example. If you're voting for Idle South Africa, if you vote with an SMS, it costs you R1.50. If you vote on WeChat, it costs you nothing. The number of people, I live with a lot of young people, and some friends of mine who boast about being born before technology have adapted. They now use WeChat. I was forced to go on WeChat a few weeks ago because they're so into this idols thing that they need to do that. So those situations need to be created, because once you go on WeChat, you unconsciously begin to develop a new set of skills. Mm-hmm. You have new knowledges and stuff like that. So as HR, we need to find those skills. We need to build those attributes, if I could call them that, so that our people can then adapt, so that when it comes, nobody falls, or very few people fall off the bus.
Exactly.
Maybe if I could just, I want to latch on to two of the points that Mpho is making. First and foremost, it's about the skills that we need. So we at Accenture, we say that we as knowledge workers specifically now need to realize that knowledge is not enough anymore. Because as Albert was saying, the fourth industrial revolution is here, and yes, artificial intelligence, machine learning, neural networks, machines are starting to catch up. Yes, machines don't know consciousness, and they don't know consciousness because we don't know consciousness. We've not analyzed consciousness yet, and because we don't understand it, we can't teach it to a machine. However, the role of knowledge is changing in our lives, and what we as human beings are going to have to learn is how to be judgment workers. And judgment workers are people that really have strong abstract thinking. A machine can think inside a box, can color inside a box. I think if you ask a machine to color outside a box, it will be very, very difficult for it to do. Human beings think outside the box. And we need to be able to bring that kind of thinking into the workplace. That's the first one. And the second one is contextual reasoning, talking about the box. The machine cannot understand blurred lines. It cannot understand gray areas. And that's where context comes in. That's where experience comes in. That's where lateral thinking comes in. That's where cultural context comes in. So people have to convert themselves from purely knowledge workers to judgment workers.
I'm glad that you bring that up, because I'd like to delve on the point as to how do you ensure or encourage the drive in that kind of thinking and the critical element, because you study, you determine to get a job, you look to keep that job and to grow in whatever prospects that you can, but how do we enable that critical element of these, you mentioned the contextual thinking as well as the judgment, how do we ensure that we actually are able to hire individuals who understand that these are themes that they'll be measured on, not just how many academic documents you manage to file per day?
I think we're in a transition at the moment. We don't really know exactly what those look like and whether machines can take over the role yet. There was a study that was done at Oxford University in 2013 that looked at existing technology, existing right now, and what's the threat to jobs in the US from existing technology. 47% of the US jobs can be replaced by existing technology now. The only reason that it's not being replaced at the moment is because it costs too much. But that cost is coming down quite dramatically and almost overnight. So that's a real threat. Now, the types of jobs that aren't under threat are those jobs, and it's exactly as Rosie's saying, jobs that require creativity, require interaction with human beings, so social workers. A machine's not going to take over that job anytime soon. Some parts of nursing, absolutely going to be taken over by machines. But the human contact side, the bedside manner and all of those type of things, they can't be taken over. Negotiation, where you need to negotiate, those type of jobs, those can't be taken over. And jobs that require art, creativity. So your industry is not under too much threat.
Thank goodness.
Because machines don't know how to entertain us entirely quite yet. But the bad news is those jobs that are routine are going to be replaced. And the jobs at the bottom that will survive are those jobs that need some dexterity with fingers in cramped spaces, and like plumbers, electricians, they're not at the bottom, but these are important jobs, but they can't be replaced by machines quite yet. But in the medium term, they absolutely may.
I think, just to add to what Albert's saying, I think there will be some, if you like, super skills that I think we're all going to need to have regardless, okay? So it doesn't mean that, it's going to be, it's seismic, sufficiently seismic, but we need to have skills for example, and some of you have already mentioned it, but I think you need skills in terms of leading yourself and managing yourself. You need skills of managing and leading others. You need skills in communication. You're going to need skills in entrepreneurship. So just to mention a few. So you're still going to need, and I think for me, central to all of that, if I had to draw one theme out of that, it would say we're still going to need a philosophy within our organizations around humanness. And we need to create HR strategies and people strategies around the humanness in the organization and what we require from the human beings in those organizations, and not to forget that as we become more tech savvy and we become more, disruptive in the digital space. I think if we're going to lose the people and the human touch in all of that, and we're not going to equip people to be able to lead effectively, lead themselves, lead others, be able to communicate, negotiate, deal with conflict, we're not going to enable people around that, then I think we're going to lose a competitive opportunity.
And to add to what Shirley has just said, as HR practitioners, we need to look beyond the borders of our organizations as we talk about manpower planning and workforce planning. We need to look at what are kids being taught at universities that is making them ready for this. Who is teaching those kids? How do we help the people that are teaching the kids to make sure that they teach them to make them work ready? I was thinking as I was driving here that I'm very good at reading maps. I'm really, really good at reading maps, and I was like, I didn't know where to come, but I don't have to. GPS gets me here. Okay, it doesn't tell me about the works that are happening, but it does if I use the right version of GPS. And I'm like saying, Should we still teach kids to read maps? Why?
True.
I don't know. I don't have the answer. But I'm asking myself, should we still be teaching them to read maps? If I look at what my grandchildren and what my nieces, at what they're being taught, I'm like, I'm not sure if you need to learn these things really, because we're going to, I mean, you're never going to use this ever in your life, given what's happening today in this context. So that's another thing, and I don't have any answers, I don't have any wisdom, I don't have any knowledge, but it is something that we as HR practitioners need to build into our workforce planning work that we need to understand.
That makes me think of two themes, though, when technology fails, because ultimately the individuals who engineer these programs, as well as robotics that take care of things, are actually formatted by human beings. So perhaps those skills might still be necessary. And number two, really, and on that second note, what I also wanted to bring up was the communication. Are we seeing efficient communication taking place between HR practitioners within the corporate structures and, of course, the educational institutions where their talent and workforce is actually coming from, if that talent is actually coming from an educational institution? First of all,
I do want to step in here, because I don't want to leave people believing that jobs are disappearing. There's also the concept of jobs are being created. And I feel for a parent who sits across from a child who says, I want to be a drone operator. What in heaven's name is that? Or I want to be an ocular scientist. What in heaven's name is that? And these are all jobs that are now being created because of technology. I mean, we looked at some research. Facebook bought Oculus, a virtual reality company. 2014, they bought the company. In 2015, there was 37% more demand for virtual reality skills. You can't wait 4 years for a university degree to create that skill. That skill was created yesterday, and the skill is required today. So what we are saying to companies nowadays is, you don't have a choice. You have to build that skill inside your organization. We're talking about academic institutions, but equally corporate universities, and I'm not talking about the bricks and mortar, big tall buildings that we create for ourselves. I'm talking about virtual learning. As an organization, we're really going to have to step up our game in terms of what skills we are teaching, both technical skills, because there's new types of jobs, and then the soft skills that both Shirley and Albert was talking about.
Albert, you wanted to get in on a point that you agreed on the creation of these new sectors and new jobs and not waiting 4 years. And you also wanted to allude to the element that maybe you don't need to be taught to teach technology.
No, the technology is designing itself at the moment. So now we've moved to Internet of Things. And so in other words, your electronics are talking to each other. And you don't need to talk to your electronics. So that's pretty much been taken out of the picture. So it's not like the old style where you had your IT manager who decided what technology was coming in. What's happening right now is your lower level employees are coming in with their own smartphones, their own iPads.
The bring your own device theme.
And they're connecting into your organization, and they can see your whole organization. They can see more of your organization than what general managers could see 10 years ago. And they've got greater influence over your whole organization. Now that leads to two major issues you've got to look at, and it's exactly as being alluded to here. What's your organizational culture going to look like?
Yeah.
How much damage can that individual do to your organization? We're not even talking about social media slip-ups and destroying your brand. It goes way further than that. So, and then the other problem that you've got, if they don't have the skills Rose is talking about, you're going to alienate your employees, and they get alienated right the way through. So you can have some poor soul coming out of a rural area where the only technology he's got access, he or her's got access to, is their smartphone and some really dicey 3G connectivity, and you bring them into this workplace, and now you start rolling these new technologies out, and you've got no option.
My question
can
then comes
alienate
in
them.
as to we need the skills, and the skills will definitely benefit the organization itself in the long term, but at what cost? Because we also talk regarding the theme of liquidity, which naturally means that your company needs to be quite agile. You might see a higher staff turnover, which has often been seen as a negative factor, but can we see the positive in this? And at what cost? Upbringing skills, bringing in the technology, and seeing these people continuously growing and evolving in the institution.
Can I just use a social media joke to respond to that? There's one that's doing the rounds. It says, the finance director talking to the HR director saying, what if these people leave after we train them? And the HR director replies and says, what if they stay and we haven't trained them?
Mm-hmm.
Think about that. So at what cost? At the cost of surviving.
Mm.
We cannot put a number to it, but what we know is that if we do not change, we might not survive. And I mean, recently in the cell phone industry, we saw what happened, where there was no adaptation, there was no growing, there was no innovation. Says, this works, let me stick to it. I mean, so think about that.
Mm. And are there particular sectors perhaps which are more adaptable to change? You mentioned the telecom space, where we have seen some innovative solutions taking place, even though there were some jobs which were lost there. You think about financial services as well, where you have a background, Shirley, seeing significant change there. Are we seeing some sectors being more open to this, and in the South African context, adapting really quickly and leading to that adaptability and agility to survive in the long term?
I think what's very important, and I saw this in financial services some years ago already, I'll never forget the first tweet that went out from a bank CEO and the amount of, attention that caught. And since then, there's been a huge effort to start not just automating, but to understand, because it's way beyond automation in my view. It's really about, technology is now driving a different business model altogether. It's driving different product requirements, service requirements, clients wanting to, be serviced in different ways, and your employees are your clients too in many respects. And I see that now that I'm in retail. I see that, quite clearly now in ways that I didn't see it before. So there's a whole different push coming from, different angles to say, absolutely what you've been doing before, you cannot continue to do that if you want to continue to be competitive. And we're going to need to think very strongly around, around innovation and how we push that. I think we face a number of challenges. We talked about risk earlier on, and people bringing their own devices into the workplace and connecting into what was previously, not done, because you were only into this, you could plug in and you were only into a single kind of site technological space. But now people can reach you from everywhere, and all sorts of risks creep into this, beyond reputational risk as well. But I think in terms of the culture and in terms of, who's in the workplace currently, and I think the culture thing is always underestimated because it's a soft and fluffy thing. But I think that, we need to think very carefully about future fit and having people just in time, ready to, to come into workplace and to do a unique proposition and to pull out and to go someplace else. What does all of that actually mean? And if you think, we're talking a lot about millennials in the workplace. Somebody talked about half of workplaces will be filled with millennials, if not already. What does it mean when you have 4 generations in a workplace, and they all have different technological attributes and attitudes? And how do these play, and to make competitive advantage happen, and to release the potential in each person to actually bring something really special to the workplace? Are we actually creating workplaces like that? Or are we still trying to shoehorn people into this hierarchical game that we've been playing traditionally, that has had its place in time, but we have moved on now? And what does this actually mean for how we do leadership development and how we equip leaders to take our organizations into the future? And that for me is really the big worry. I think the other worry, I think Albert would be more interested in this particular one, is, Rosie and I were just talking earlier about policies and procedures, the old HR policies and procedures, and the way we used to, everything's in a box, and and it's very structured and very logical and very rational, and it's absolutely not future fit any longer. So if you're going to have, networkers, and you're going to have freelancers, and you're going to have just-in-time staffers, how are you going to ensure that these people are being, recruited fairly, paid equitably, performance managed, and you're creating an engaging culture, across, all the different diversities that we find in the workplace. And I mean, a lot has been said about millennials, and I'm sure we're going to come to that in a few minutes because we have some passionate comments on that when we do get there. But it's, this always on culture, how, and how are we going to deal with
Shirley,
this?
to you. As Woolworths, a global brand, well-respected retailer, not only in South Africa but also with operations in Australia, how are you getting it right? Because not only do you need people at the front of the interaction with consumers, who are at the tellers, who are working with them on the storefront, but individuals at the top as well who need to conceptualize the design and the thinking that incorporates the results that come out of Accenture's report.
It's very, very interesting because I've been appointed as the group head of HR for Woolworths Holdings Limited. So within Woolworths Holdings, you have Woolworths South Africa, you have David Jones Sydney, you have Country Road Melbourne, and I'm trying to build synergies, integration and alignment across the three. And a big component of that is talent mobility, is succession planning, is some of the shared services. We even have to rethink what shared services actually means, because it's not the old, let's automate every process, because it can be every bad and every old to traditional process. You've got to really think out of the box in terms of how one does that. And imagine an app where you can, all your employees, your 70,000 in Woolworths Holdings around the world can switch on an app and apply, do their leave and do whatever they need to do in terms of, managing their work and delivery every day. So the question really is, in the Woolworths environment, you have people in the stores, you have the front face. What does that mean in terms of what is being done differently? And there's a whole lot of thinking going into that. And then you have, the leaders having to have the vision and the, seeing the innovation horizon and saying which strategic choices do we have to make and which place do we want to play and what is going to make us most competitive and step change us in terms of how we line up against every other competitor in the market. And there's some fascinating, strategic concepts being, talked about right now that we hope we will be able to lead as we move forward. But Woolworths is very enterprising, very pioneering, and I think because it has this kind of southern hemisphere retail footprint, it's going to be very interesting to see how it actually manages the mobility of its staff and how it actually ensures that the level of the store and the level of the big thinkers and driving the strategy and everything in between is going to ensure that we are moving forward in a very, very exciting way and a proposition to our customers that is going to be second to none.
It's actually quite interesting. Just the concept of the liquid workforce. People think that it really just applies to startups. Talking about jokes. One of our very clever analysts, our young people at Accenture, they think they are very clever, said that the liquid workforce is the company swimming team. But it's not the company swimming team. So if you look at companies, for example, like Uber or Airbnb, we always refer to them as the leading edge startups, and they are the ones that lead the liquid workforce concept into the future. Because they don't own all the employees themselves, they use excess cars if it's Uber, and they use drivers to really extend their workforce, talking about extended workforce. So Airbnb, they use extra bedrooms, and they use you and me as owners of homes to become B&B owners to help them extend their workforce. And it makes sense when you think about that as an extended workforce concept. But even with traditional companies. We talk about Woolworths that has been around for many, many years. In China, there's a company, 85,000 people. They make about 80,000 fridges a year. And the new CEO comes in and he says, I'm not going to achieve my strategic objectives with the way that I currently have my organization, which is an organization that's very hierarchical, it's very pyramid structured. I have my people, they are on WeChat and they use all kinds of social media. My systems are all in the cloud. So even though I have security, I can absolutely segment my workforce whichever way I want to. That company then changed its organizational structure, completely flattened it, and made it such that there is about 200 teams of about 40 people. Self-starting teams, teams that have chosen their own leaders, and they choose how they want to work and what they want to do. And that company improved its market capitalization 3 times.
Sure.
So it applies to everybody.
Exactly. And the broad theme that you also mentioned that I would like to pick up on now when we return from the break is the teams themselves electing their own leaders, and how that also applies within the generational context, which was brought up shortly. But we're going to take a quick ad break. When we return, we continue with our conversation leading into the new. Welcome back to this edition of Leading in the New. Now, this is where we're discussing the workforce of the future. And still with me in studio, I have my panelists, Dr. Rose Phillips, Managing Director for Accenture Consulting, Professor Albert Voka from Gibbs Business School, Professor Shirley Zinn, Group Head of Human Resources for Woolworths Limited, and Mpho Lekhabe, Executive Chairperson for Litushane. Thanks again for joining us. And just before the ad break, we certainly highlighted a few elements with regard to the changing dynamics of the workforce and preparing for these changes. And one of the critical elements that comes up and is a key part of the conversation is the changes in millennials and generational interactions between individuals who are Generation X and Y, and even with the baby boomer generation. How critical is the millennials talent pool, given that I understand within the next couple of years they'll actually make up the majority of the talent pool, and how this impacts on labor forces and labor practices to enable this workforce? Maybe let's get your view, Rose.
Yeah, I mean, just statistically, last year we hit 50% of the workforce as millennial, and in 2025 we're saying that there's going to be 75% of our workforce is millennial. And in certain instances where we are service industries and very heavily knowledge workers, probably is already at about 75%. And what's even more interesting is that 15% of those millennials are already in management positions. So these people are decision makers. They are determining how we do things. And what's important about the millennial generation is, as Mpho said earlier, they are digital natives. They grew up with the technologies. Their expectation of the workforce is that they can be within the workplace exactly the way that they are outside of the workplace. If they can operate like a consumer outside of the workplace, and they can focus on the experience they get as a consumer outside of the workplace, imagine what happens inside the workplace in terms of experience. The experience of the employee is becoming even more important, and that is because they demand it. And that is what the millennials demand. They demand an experience. Their career is no longer a path, it's a journey. It's a journey of multiple stops at various places. It's a journey of sharing. It's a journey of connectivity, because that's how they grew up. They grew up in a sharing economy. They grew up in a connected economy. On their cell phone, they are providing just as much data into the system. Where am I sitting stuck in traffic? What kind of food is good for you? What airline do you travel on or don't you travel on? They don't necessarily tell you that just to be nasty. They tell you that because they believe that they are contributing towards the knowledge in the world. Those are the kinds of people that we are dealing with now. And those are the kind of people, if we want the best of them, we're going to have to change how our organizations operate.
And are the characteristics the same though? Because I've seen quite a few research studies which focus on developed economies, and that millennials might be lazy, or they have is this entitlement attitude. They just want nice German sedans, as well as living on holiday trips and that Instagram lifestyle. Is that the perception which is generated and perhaps is proven to be true even in the local South African market?
Can I just come in here? I mean, when I first studied this issue of millennials versus baby boomers, I mean, there was one thing that came through to me, and that dispels what you've just said. There was a saying that says, baby boomers live to work, millennials work to live. So it's not that the German sedans, the holidays are important. It's because to them balance is important. Saying that I work so that I can have a life, and I have a life so I can have all these multiple experiences and everything. Whereas baby boomers just lived to work, so that I suppose, I mean, it was different times then when we were growing. We were growing up because the world was different, and you didn't really know too much about the world out there, whereas they know about everything.
Interconnectedness.
And
through
it's
social media.
interconnected. They just, I mean, they give you you get the most amazing answers from the most amazing people. Again, I will personalize this, but my grandchild, who's 8 now, when she was about 6.5, 7, I wanted to charge my phone and I was in a hurry. She said, "Made, put it on airplane mode, it charges quicker." And I looked at this thing, I mean, to be told that by a very short person, and it was true. I was like, how do you know this? I read it on YouTube. That's their lives. So what we need to do is we need to just make sure that we don't, again, push them away and say they're materialistic. They're not materialistic. They just have a different view of life in the world to what we had when we were growing up. They see so much all at once, and they want to experience all of it. I mean, if I know it's there, why wouldn't I want to experience it? Whereas it was different for us. We worked and worked and worked. That was our life.
Yeah.
I think let's be careful on generalizing about generations. The more serious research has shown that it's been overstated. Essentially, there's some big research that's been done that's been tracking generations over a 30-year period. And they've found that, in fact, the generation gap is collapsing. So think about it. Generational theory is based on the assumption that there's a value system that belongs to a cohort that was born in a period of time, and this value system is going to follow them to the grave. And this cohort is defined by that. So this long piece of research that started looking at things like charity, looking at views on religion and all the rest of it, has found that the generational gap's actually been collapsing. So now think about your views on values. Your views compared to your children's views, and your views compared to your parents' views, and their views compared to their grandparents' views. So the generational gap is collapsing. And now what's leading to it to collapse is technology and learning. Now you have to assume, if you're going to stick to generational theory, you have to assume that learning is not happening.
And in this case it is.
And it is happening. So there's a more sophisticated argument which talks about your stage of life. When you're young, what do you want to do? You want to experience as much as possible. Now you've got a new environment and new technology that enables you to do that. And when you've got younger children and you're paying off school fees, what do you want out of life?
The best for your children.
You want to make absolutely sure that you've got a job. And now you claim that that's a generational and millennial thing. No, it's not. The world has changed dramatically. The older people in their 60s today are very different to people in their 60s then. The main reason is they're learning, they've got more technology. The time you've got the greatest change in your life is in your late 50s, early 60s. That's when your children are leaving home, your career's nearing an end, you've got another 30 or 40 years.
So does that make it easy then to prepare for this workforce of the future if it's actually not really changing? Because the individual objectives, as you highlighted...
No, the workforce is changing, but the whole workforce is changing.
Okay.
I don't think we're contradicting each other
we're
here.
Not
we're not contradicting.
We're not.
The fact is, 10 years ago, the issue of millennials was a serious thing that we needed to take seriously. Because I can tell you, my children tell me, we don't want to work the way you and Papa have worked. We definitely don't want to be working 14-hour days for so long because we miss out on so much. So when they go to work, they look for different experiences, they look for different things, they look for different tools to be able
40,
to do that.
When they hit 40, they're going to say, they're going to have a different set of priorities.
Yeah, you know, maybe, and I agree. I think that you kind of saying the same thing. Let me just start. What I want to say is that, you know, I think that unfortunately the debate on generational debates, and particularly the focus on millennials, has actually led to stigmatization, has led to stereotypes about millennials and who they are and what they want and how they stack up against baby boomers and so on. So I think there's
and
this
X's.
and X's, of course. We
You're
can't
on
leave
your
them
own.
out. So I think that, you know, it's unfortunate, you know, that, you know, the whole bling era and, you know, the whole instant kind of, you know, entitlement and, you know, always on demand and, you know, so I think that is actually a problem. I think that when you look at some of the broader kind of discourse going on out there, it's really millennials and I think other generations are looking for meaning and purpose in life. They're looking for, you know, what makes best sense for me in this current context and scenario, and how do I ensure that I'm the very best version that I can be with everything that I have to navigate out there. So how do workplaces then create a compelling experience for people coming into the workplace today versus coming into the workplace 30 years ago when the gold watch was the aspiration, you know, after being there for 30 odd years and when you retire. So I think that, you know, young people are looking to make a difference to the world as well. They are looking for that quality of life perhaps in a different way from what other generations might have been looking for it for. And they're asking us to please give them an experience that enables them to make a difference to society, to the workplace, to their families, in quite a different and compelling way, and in a more coherent, integrated way perhaps than, you know, now I'm at work and now I'm at home and now I'm in my community and etc. It's a more congruent kind of life that people are looking for, and we need to be able in our workplaces and in the cultures in the workplace that we create to be able to offer that. So it goes beyond engagement. So the old engagement surveys, I want to say, I'm really cynical about the amount of money we pay for these things, and now I'm really standing on a soapbox, okay? I'm tired of paying hundreds of thousands of rands for interviews and tick box surveys for people to tell me how they feel about the organization when I can just have a conversation with them, you know, and I can have an ongoing conversation with them. And the same goes for performance management and all of those other components of HR that we actually don't do very well.
I completely agree, because it's quite interesting that people forget that technology, we think that this is a technology artifact. Technology has been something that societies have had for millennials. The caveman's technology was fire. In the 60s, we had a different technology, maybe mainframe. And this is what you're also saying. The concepts that we are dealing with now is that technology is collapsing. Everything is collapsing into what technology is offering us now because of the digital connected world with cheap sensors that we have available to us. So yes, it might not be that every generation maintains a different value system, but there's absolute evidence that shows that because of the technology where it is currently, the ability for people to solve bigger problems are there. And so therefore within the workplace, and this is one of the biggest challenges that our work leaders, our C-suite is facing, still the biggest problem, 82% of people at C-suite says the biggest problem they still have is to be able to gain the right talent. Now if you look at companies like Tesla, just going to purpose, what is their purpose? Their purpose is not to put battery-powered cars on the road. Their purpose is to solve the energy problem of the world. And they go out and they say they get the best talent, whether they're millennial talent or whether they are older talent, they get the best talent because they are solving the real problems of the world. That's what organizations need to grapple with, to be able to use the technologies that we have available now to be able to bring the best of all of our generational talent to be able to solve the big problems of the world. And there are solutions to that.
Are there?
If I may add to that, that's exactly right. And particularly as we're going through this transition in the fourth industrial revolution, people have options. Those with those skills that Rose is talking about, they have options. And so what you're beginning to pick up with your gig economy, your Ubers and so on, you're getting new employment relationships. So you don't know if Uber, for instance, calls them contractors, but they see themselves as employees, at least in South Africa. And the Californian state also sees them as employees and not contractors. So that becomes very, 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 very difficult and very, very interesting. And some of the implications, if they were contractors and they got together and said to Uber, we want to push up the amount that we're claiming from you for driving clients around, that would be anti-competitive behavior. But if they were employees, that would be fair employee behavior. So you've got those kind of problems. You've got loyalty, which is there is no
What's
loyalty.
that?
What's
Exactly,
loyalty?
with the liquid.
I'll do the job for you, but that's it. How do you build an organizational culture with people that you see for a project and you never see them again?
Mm-hmm.
So, and then of course, how do you coordinate them? At the moment, because we're stuck in an old way of thinking, we're trying to resolve this problem by meetings. And even if the meetings are Skype meetings, we're having meetings and meetings and meetings, and meetings
But
are
nothing
destroying
without action.
the productivity.
Exactly. It also raises another theme that I was thinking about, and you mentioned the balance of speaking and communicating with your employees and understanding what it is they want. But at the same time, employees and these contractors are also meant there to serve a purpose for the organization that they are tied to. So how do you then conceptualize the reward, or how you measure the success of this particular individual's contribution to your entity when instead of working 40 hours a week, they're only working 20 hours, and perhaps they're not on site, they're doing this in a coffee shop, in a restaurant somewhere, off of their laptop? Are these themes that we can consider, especially in a company or country like South Africa rather, where there's also this ongoing conversation regarding the national minimum wage? 20 Rand an hour is what I understand the current rate is being discussed and has been put forward by government. But are these elements that, we need to take into consideration?
Yeah, I think, we have to reframe the way we think about compensation. And I think that, if we are still trying to superimpose some traditional, old, classical sense of how we remunerate people, we are actually going to have a problem, in the long term. The question really is, how do we value what people bring as opposed to necessarily counting the hours? Does the hours that people work equate to value that people bring? And I think that's the big, shift in the paradigm and in the conversation that we need to have, because often we can work for 40 hours a week, and we can have presenteeism, a grand presenteeism, but we're actually really not productive, and we're not doing the innovative and exciting things, and we are not extracting that wonderful magic out of people that is called talent. So and we often douse people because we box them. We say this is what you're supposed to do, and that's that. So if you are now saying to people, you're in a network, it's fluid, we're going to try and value you for what you bring, your unique proposition, it's going to require a different way of thinking. I think so. That's one element of the conversation. The other element of the conversation which you referred to is the minimum wage discussion, and the announcement that was just made yesterday and agreed by NEDLAC for South Africa. And I think it deals with a particular contextual issue in South Africa, and it tries to say we have a huge gap, in terms of Gini coefficient. We have a lot of people who are working in the lower end here who have been exploited, let's put it that way, for many, many years. Let's close this, let's create some equality for them. Let's give them, and it's not even a decent wage, it's just, the minimum. Let's give them a job at least, so they can be economically active and they can be part of the economic mainstream as opposed to on the periphery of it. And if I'm going to work not the 40 hours and do a presenteeism exercise, but if I'm going to work 20 hours and you work 20 hours, then two of us have jobs, and we begin to tackle, the unemployment issues simultaneously. So I think we must think creatively about the possible opportunities in all of this.
Mm-hmm. I'd like to come in here, if I may. For me, it's not about thinking what it should be like and then working at creating it. For me, it's a matter of conversing with the people. You say, this is what we're aiming for, this is the direction that we're going, this is the team, or these are the people, the team that is going to take us there. How do you think we should? How do you feel we could go along this way? On the issue, on a very, very personal basis, on the issue of the minimum wage, I think about time too, and it is still too low.
You want to come in there, Albert? You agree?
Absolutely agree with you.
Even though they say this could contribute to economic activity again and participation.
Okay, I need to declare, in a previous life I was a trade unionist, so my views may be tainted or enhanced by that. But quite honestly, the research has shown that minimum wage it's a good thing. Most economies, most developed economies have some form of minimum wage, and it can only be a good thing. I think the minimum wage is on the low side, but we've got to phase it in, and it's not as if it's fixed for all eternity, and so it'll continue. And we also need to remember that the jobs that people are saying are going to be lost from minimum wage are already covered by agreements, union negotiated agreements in most of their sectors. About 30% of our workforce is already covered by some other form of minimum wage. So I think it's all round, it's a great thing.
I mean, I come from a different side of the table. He was on the other side as a trade unionist. I was on the other side as an HR director, but I agree with him fully, because people have to live. And we, and I say we guardedly here, we have to make sure that we enable other people to live. Because for me, it will take away a lot of the social issues that we have, a lot of the social ills that we have. Because why do people steal, basically? Yes, some people steal because they steal. But some people steal because they have to live. But if I lived a little bit more simply, then those people would be able to live as well. So, and I challenge, people who say it should be, say, how much do you spend when you go out every Friday night? Go out every other Friday night, you will be happily able to and easily be able to afford that which you need to pay. So yeah, we agree.
I also just want to add a different dimension to the whole conversation. And we're talking about minimal wage in places like South Africa. Pretty soon across the world, we're going to be talking about giving people a stipend, because machines are taking away the work. So what are human beings going to do, and how are we going to become economically active? The point for me is about being economically active. And we must find ways that we can give people an economic active thing to do, whether it is a full-time job or a part-time role. I think we have no choice. We have to do that. If we don't do that, we don't deal with issues of survival. And if people cannot deal with issues of survival, they cannot bring their best to the work environment. The last point I want to make on this topic, though, is we cannot protect our people from technology. So some of our business leaders are saying, because we do not have enough work for people, because we have to deal with issues of minimal wage, because we have to deal with issues of providing manual labor, we have to protect our people from technology. My view is that we have to use the opportunity to teach. We have to use the opportunity to make sure that we are relevant in a digital age. We must be able to make sure that there is such a thing as digital fluency, that we teach to everybody across all generations, to be able to be fluent, to be able to use a smartphone, a feature phone, to be able to do payments online, to be able to look at your salary online. And that applies to everybody.
Okay. You want to add a point there, Shirley, just before we start concluding?
One last word on the minimum wage. I think, it's time, and there's the ethical and the moral imperative. I think there's the social imperative that we've talked about now, but it's enabling, it gets people into, the economy, and they're able to, this whole point about you can learn. Once you out of the space of zero earning, you're into a space of earning, you can grow, learn, thrive, and you can just, it can be hugely productive and add value to the growth of the entire economy. So, and I think that even if we go into the stipend example that was made, even if it's a different kind of emolument or remuneration, it is still an opportunity to earn something and to enable people to get their dignity and to be able to make a difference to their families. And I think that is what we must try and work on.
Indeed. Very critical elements that have been highlighted throughout the conversation, but we've got about 2 minutes to wrap it all up. And given your association, Shirley and Mpho, with the Institute of People Management, I'd like to get your closing remarks on how people need to be cognizant of this changing workforce and easily implementable solutions that they need to look at to ensure that they have economic opportunities, as has been highlighted in the future. And Albert and Rose, as we come to you, perhaps if we can focus on institutions and the critical elements that they need to ensure they enable to have a flexible but yet rigorous workforce for the future. Your closing remarks.
From my perspective, HR practitioners need to learn and to be able to implement transitional activities, because all of these are transitions from one phase to another, to another, to another. And what we need to do is we need to learn those transitional activities. How do you transition people from this to that, from this to that, from this to that? There's a lot that's been written about it. I mean, if we look at the 4 stages of learning or the 4 stages of growth, from going from being unconsciously unskilled to being unconsciously skilled, the methodologies and the ways in which you move people across that. And that is what we need to practice as HR to make sure that we make these transitions and we make sure that they are successful.
Shirley?
I think as HR we need to question all our assumptions about how things used to be done and how things would need to be done into the future. We need to lead our organizations through very, very complex transitions. I mean, somebody said we live in a VUCA world, so it's volatile, it's uncertain, it's complex and it's ambiguous, and it's going to become even more complex as we find this, this fusion of technology and disruption and digital and big data. And we need to lead our organizations. We need to equip our organizations and our leadership. And we need to take our people through a journey that is going to be enabling and facilitate them to be functional and to thrive in the changes that we are about to experience and already experiencing.
Yeah. Albert?
From my side, the future, I'm very optimistic. The future, we've sketched a picture that it may look bleak, but in fact, technology is enabling and people are using it subconsciously. You've got people on street corners with cell phones. This is creating opportunities. They're creating marketers. They're creating whole new business models that are coming in. Now, from a university perspective, the skills we've got to teach is how to find solutions to problems out of traditional spaces. So it's not going to be coming out of books, it's going to be coming out of networking. And we've got to teach people how to evaluate what they're seeing and possible solutions, and we've got to teach creativity. Absolutely, creativity is the future.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, on the point of being optimistic, if I look at places like South Africa, India, and China, where really the young population of the world lives, which is really where our wealth is. Our wealth sits in our youth. These are places where we really can and should be much more digitally savvy, and we can see that happening in these particular countries. And on the other side of the coin, you see places like Europe, where the populations are aging first and foremost, and where there are work for which there are no skills. So here we have a skills surplus, and there we have skills demand. And I can see a future where the world and the labor market becomes more and more flat, because we have digital technologies to enable us to be able to make that world flat and make sure that where there is supply, there is also demand on the other side that can be met. And ultimately, digital is about empowerment. It's not really about skilling, it's about empowerment, and that's what we need to do. The world is digital outside. It's time for us as organizations to realize that we have to be digital on the inside.
Fantastic note to leave it off on. Thank you so much to each of my panelists for participating in today's conversation. And as you can tell, it's a whole new world of changing the way in which we think, enhancing critical thinking skills, creativity, and of course making use of the opportunities that exist and incorporating technology in that realm. But that's a wrap for this episode, and a big thank you once more to my panelists, Dr. Rose Phillips, Managing Director of Accenture Consulting, Professor Albert Fokker from Gibbs Business School, Professor Shirley Zinn, Group Head of Human Resources for Woolworths, and Mpho Leklape, who is Executive Chairperson of Litushane. Until next time, it's been a pleasure speaking with you today. It's goodbye for now.